All right, let's get to our first guest. Our first guest we've had on a couple of times, actually several times. A.R. Roberts, Alan Roberts, was a musician in the 1960s and traveled the country with different groups, one of which appeared on the old Ed Sullivan Show in December of 1964. He later worked in the hotel industry before opening a photography studio. He became interested in UFO phenomena in 1954 while serving as a volunteer in the Ground Observer Corps. Alan is now semi-retired and lives in sunny, warm Florida. We've had Alan on so many times. His book is called From Atom to Omega, and Alan's going to tell you about how he put the book together, but we've always had just fun going all over with the interview, and I've learned a lot, and it's opened my mind up. So without any more waiting, let's go ahead and get him on the line. Alan, are you there? Good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio.
Thank you, my friend. How you doing?
I am well. I'm trying to keep warm. When you called into, I usually leave my house right around 45 minutes before the show starts and have no problem. And I got out the door, and it turned from rain to snow immediately, and it is just coming down like a blizzard out there tonight.
Jeez, it's been nice out here. We've had a few cold days where it went down, or over by the ocean here, and it went down into the 50s. At night, but to us, that's cold.
I can imagine. How is it? But you, didn't you have a little bit of a cold snap that came through there as well?
Yeah, that was it. Inland, further inland, it got I think down into the 40s further inland. But we're right near the ocean here, not that far away, just a few blocks right over the intercoastal, and. It's been pretty nice. Of course, it's always a little bit warmer near the ocean than it is, further inland.
Right.
But no, we can't complain. But they're predicting another cold snap coming in next week sometime. So I'm not sure yet how cold that's going to be. Maybe down in the 50s again, or low 50s or something. But we can live with that.
Yeah, I think we can, man. It was 40. It was in the mid 40s today, with the winds out of the south blowing probably 40 miles an hour. It was just crazy out there. And then like I said, it started thundering and lightning, and then we went right into winter. But it looks like we're going to get a little bit of a break. Hopefully, right when the holidays come up, and then hopefully we'll get a little bit of a break, and we won't see the cold snaps. It's just, it's really crazy. And talking about fringy stuff, of course, when you start talking about the way the weather has been changing and stuff, of course, everybody some people say, well, it's global warming. Other people say, maybe they're using HAARP to play with the atmosphere. Maybe this is helping, maybe this is helping Monsanto out through some sort of artificial weather changes, or maybe it's extraterrestrial. Who knows? But it seems like as of the past few years, the weather patterns have truly changed.
I think I don't know about global warming. I think probably most of it has to do with precession. The way the Earth rotates on its axis and the cycles of about every 26,000 years. That's when you get your ice ages, when the northern hemispheres kind of tilted further away from the sun, and you get these ice ages that come in. But when it tilts back to the way it is right currently, well, then things start to warm up again. The ice melts and the climates change again. So I think we're just getting probably the last effects of the last change. And actually, the change started in December 21st of 2012 with all the doomsday predictions that they had.
Oh, without a doubt.
And the end of the Mayan calendar ended on that day. Our sun was lined up with the center of the galaxy, which they call the galactic equator, and they're afraid the black hole would create some devastating gravitational effects that was going to destroy the world and all this crazy nonsense. And then, like I mentioned the last time I was on, I said they predicted the same things like back in, I think it was 2005, when all the planets were aligned on the same side of the sun. They predicted all kinds of doomsday scenarios there, but such planetary alignments occur on a regular basis about every 20 years, and we're still here. So, I like I said, I don't put much faith in the global warming scenario. I mean, the global heating scenario there. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Well,
Maybe it does other people.
And I think as far as humanity goes, modern day humanity, if you will, Alan, we've been around such a short period of time. This planet has seen so many different things, so many different times over the years. It's amazing. We're just kind of here to experience some of it. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is A.R. Roberts. Again, Alan, thank you so much for giving us some time tonight.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, Pat.
So we might as well get into the meat of things. Every time we have you on, we kind of go so many different directions, and we got a lot of questions sent in for you tonight. But why don't, for the listeners that have not heard you before, of course, our new listeners that are listening to us on the shortwave station now, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and how you got into writing the book and your UFO encounter way back when? Why don't you give us a little bit of the backstory?
Okay, it started back in the spring of 1955 up in Plattsburgh, New York. They were building a new Air Force base at the south end of town, and during that time, people started seeing all kinds of weird things in the sky. And I was a member of the Ground Observer Corps, and our post was located up on the roof of Physicians Hospital. Then there were two fellows who would come up pretty regularly from the local radio station, Art Pierce and Jim Roddy. Jim was the news director, and Art was the newscaster. And we got to know each other pretty well over the weeks. And one night when they were up there, they saw something come down and in the glare of the construction lights where they're laying the runways by this new base. I didn't see it. I was on the phone calling in a routine aircraft report, but they were, really adamant that something happened. Something came down there, and they wanted to go over and check it, and they invited me to go along with them. And so I put the post out of operation, and we drove over to the area, and we were actually on a dirt road in the middle of the woods just adjacent to the construction site, and we saw this huge white oval-shaped glowing thing over our heads. It was just drifting silently and slowly to the east, and in a matter of 5, 6, 7 seconds, it was out of sight over the trees. And that bothered me for many, many years. I didn't know what it was, and I think it was probably 1988, 33 years later, that I decided I got to do some research on this stuff just to satisfy my own curiosity. And writing a book was really the farthest thing from my mind. But as I got into it, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So for the next 23 years, I spent researching and getting into all kinds of areas that I never even expected to. And I learned an awful lot. I mean, I was very naive in thinking in the beginning that I'd probably come up with in a month or two, I could probably have enough information, maybe learn what it was that I saw back in 1955. But anyway, the complete title of the book is From Atom to Omega, An Anatomy of UFO Phenomena. I split the book into 3 parts to try to make everything completely cohesive and understanding. Part 1 pretty much of the book covers the evidence confirming the reality of UFOs and all of the issues that are associated with them. And I cite, several credible cases along with the testimonies of police officers, Air Force and commercial airline pilots, and even astronauts. And these are all highly credible witnesses. And when you get into part 2 of the book, which is called the biblical connection, then you will see how much of the information in part 1 is really relevant. And as I tried to connect all the dots. And eventually my research, led me into the Bible, where I discovered many clues to hybrids, to technology, and genetic manipulation designed to accelerate the evolution of the human race on a social, moral, and technological level. But the big question to me was, why? Now, I think the answer can be found in the biblical prophecies and in information that's been provided by abductees that suggests these aliens are preparing us to survive some future cataclysmic event, one that may possibly result in the extinction of the human race. Now, I know it sounds a bit far-fetched, but evidence, it strongly suggests that these aliens became aware of some catastrophic event that's going to occur, and it's something that we have yet to discover. And it's something that may cause our extinction, and apparently it's something that even alien technology is unable to prevent. And the information suggests that it won't happen in our lifetime, maybe later on in this millennium or the next. Now, there are a lot of things that could cause our extinction. A large gamma ray burst from an exploding star, or a direct hit from a giant solar flare that could wipe out our atmosphere and us along with it. And, of course, you got the more obvious possibilities of the Earth being hit by a large asteroid or a comet. There's always another possibility. It could be a rogue planet, and there's a lot of them wandering around in our galaxy. Now, all of this is coming from two different sources, the Bible and the book of Revelation, and by abductees claiming that aliens showed them scenes of apocalyptic devastation, and it told them, these things are really going to happen. Now, there was an incident that occurred in 1994 that tends to support these claims. Now, it received very little publicity in the United States, but what really impressed me was that the witnesses were not police officers, they were not astronauts or military or airline pilots, they were not abductees. They were young school children, 62 of them to be exact.
Right.
And this event occurred over in Africa, in Ruwa, Zimbabwe. Now, these children, I estimated to be approximately 7 to 10 years old. They appeared to be very well educated for their age. They were well-spoken, very articulate, their stories all matched, and the details in the sketches they drew were all very, very similar. What happened was a silver disc-shaped craft came down and landed behind a few trees at the far end of the field while the children were outside playing in the schoolyard. And they all described the creature that came out of this craft as pretty much a typical gray with large dark eyes, and he was wearing a black outfit. Now, several of these children said that they had received messages in their heads that somehow they associated with the creature's eyes, and that's a typical abductee description. Now, the messages seem to be warnings, dire warnings. The impression of one girl was that something is going to happen to our planet. Another girl's impression was about the world coming to an end, and another said that the creature seemed to be warning us that we are, and this is quote-unquote, making harm on this world and that we should not get too technologed. Now, for a young girl, it's pretty strong language.
Word, yeah.
Well, the incident was investigated by an African MUFON investigator, Cynthia Hind, and also by the late Dr. John Mack, that Harvard psychiatrist. And both found that the children and their stories to be extremely credible. And as Cynthia Hind put it, why would 62 children lie? Well, at any rate, in evaluating all the information, it suggests that if we're going to survive whatever this is going to happen, we need to find another planet to live on. And there also that there was a deadline for us to begin our space activities by the middle of the 20th century. Now, of course, once we stepped into space, it would take at least several centuries for us to develop the technologies that we would need to be able to travel around the galaxy and find a new home. So, this is evidence that whatever it is that's going to happen is still a long way off. Now, I suspect that these aliens started by modifying the DNA of prehistoric man, in an effort to expand his level of intelligence. But after they got past the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon stage, I think more experiments were conducted to advance evolution. Now, they may have created different races to experiment on by genetically enhancing different abilities. This is what I suspect. Now, one of these experiments may have involved enhancing mental abilities. Now, the idea is not that crazy when you look at some of these amazing architectural achievements of ancient man, like Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, Teotihuacan, Göbekli Tepe. You really got to wonder, did these people have levitating abilities? some of the stone blocks in the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek, Lebanon, weigh in excess of 1,000 tons. There's no machinery in existence today that could even move blocks of that size. And how the heck did these ancient people do it? Now, some claim it was done by a long-forgotten civilization that had developed advanced technologies, and I suppose it's possible, but what happened to them? Where did they go? I mean, no evidence has ever been found to verify their existence. Now, it's possible that maybe glacial movement during the Ice Age wiped out all traces of their existence, or else maybe they disappeared under the oceans as water level rose when these glaciers melted. And there's others that believe these structures were created by aliens, which I suppose is possible, but again, there's really been no evidence to support it. But I wonder, were these structures really created by one of these aliens' experimental races with enhanced mental abilities, that gave them the power to levitate these stone blocks with their minds? And if that was the case, that may have been a mistake, because there was no progress being made toward the development of technologies that would lead to space exploration. I mean, why would these people want to build mechanical devices or machines, to move these large blocks if they could do it with their minds?
Right.
But what happened to them? It appears that sometime maybe after the Great Pyramids were built, the creation of these monolithic structures just suddenly ended. But it appears that the next experimental step was in the Garden of Eden. That's where man suddenly became blessed with virtually unlimited lifespans. And it appears that was another mistake. Adam, as I suspect, was a hybrid that was created to infuse improved genetic qualities into the existing race. Now, if he hadn't failed his test, more hybrids would have been created to speed up the process. But something in his genetic program wasn't quite right, and he was susceptible to negative influences, and he was not the perfect law-abiding specimen of humanity that they intended. And his genetic imperfection, of course, was inherited by his children, who pass him on to their children, and they to their children, and so on down the line. So now these aliens were faced with the problem of dealing with a genetically imperfect race with virtually unlimited lifespans. Now, the Bible clearly describes the steps that were taken to correct the situation. And the first step was to eliminate these unlimited lifespans. So Adam and Eve were put out of the Garden of Eden, and therefore they were prevented from any further access to the source of their longevity, which the Bible calls the tree of life. But that may only be a metaphorical reference to whatever the source of their longevity really was. So to make sure they couldn't get back into the garden, according to Genesis 3:24, it tells us that a security device in the form of a flaming sword flashing back and forth was installed at the entrance to the garden. And that sounds just like a security device that we use today that, utilizes a sweeping laser beam. Who had that kind of technology 6,000 years ago.
Right.
So without access to the tree of life, or whatever it really was, the lifespans of Adam's descendants gradually decreased, and eventually, about 1,000 years later, they became stable at around 120 years. Now, another race was needed to continue the project, but before anything could be done, they had to determine how long it was going to take for the life cycles of Adam's descendants to return to normal. Now, when they realized it was going to be over 1,000 years, and that's when their only solution they had then was get rid of them, eliminate them. But whatever means, that they chose to do that was not going to guarantee that there wouldn't be any survivors. They'd be able to get rid of the majority of them, but not all. And this set their project behind by approximately 2,000 years, which is just about how long it took to finish the job that had been intended for Adam by finally creating a new race, a genetically improved race, through Isaac. Now, Isaac, I suspect, was also a hybrid, since the Bible tells us he was miraculously born to Sarah, Abraham's wife, when she was about 90 years old. And according to the Bible, she was sterile. So how could a 90-year-old sterile woman possibly become pregnant unless it was by some process of insemination, and that's the same thing that aliens are really doing today with female abductees. Now, Isaac's descendants had to be isolated from the remnants of Adam's descendants for several centuries in order to prevent genetic contamination that might occur from any social or even sexual contact with them. It was important that for them to maintain their hybrid genetic purity as they grew into a nation. So the events were manipulated that led to Isaac's descendants migrating to Egypt, where they remained for about 500 years. Well, they did very well for the first 100 years. They prospered and everything, but for the next 400 years, that's when the Egyptians enslaved them and started to use them for forced labor. Now, during that time, they did grow in population to the size of a small nation, and that's when Moses was recruited to liberate them and bring them back to Canaan, the land of their ancestors, which the Bible calls their promised land. And with the help of these aliens and their sophisticated weapons, they were able to overcome the armies of the current inhabitants of this land, and they were able to reclaim it as their own. Now, their move to Egypt, their 4 centuries of slavery, their liberation and their deliverance into their promised land were events that had been planned at least 500 years in advance. 500 years before Moses liberated them from Egypt, the Lord told Abraham that his descendants would become enslaved in another land for 400 years, and that he would punish those who had enslaved them, and the punishment being the 10 plagues, and that he would deliver them into their promised land.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight on our snowy, cold evening here in Salt Lake City is Alan Roberts. Again, Alan, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us here.
I'm glad to do it, Pat.
Do you want to pick back up, and then I got a couple of questions I want to ask of you?
Okay. All right. So the Israelites' migration to Egypt, their enslavement and everything, was a plan that had been conceived 500 years, at least 500 years earlier. Now, the only part of the plan that was not revealed was their 40-year isolation in the desert, where they would be indoctrinated with all bunch of new laws and rules of social and moral behavior. They had to let go of the laws and the traditions they had come to live by during their time in Egypt, and it was necessary that they conform to these new laws of social and moral conduct before being brought to their promised land. And this is something that had to be done while they were still all together, before they entered their new land and began spreading out. Now, if the people had known in advance that they were going to be sequestered in the desert for the next 40 years, I don't think they ever would have really followed Moses. Now, I suspect that the stories as they are laid out in the Bible is more or less a blueprint of the aliens' plan. It's really describing metaphorically exactly what they've been doing for the past 4,000 to 5,000 years to advance our evolution. Now, many of the events really don't conform to the timeline of the Bible, but the stories of the creation, the Garden of Eden, the flood, and so forth, they appear to have been borrowed from earlier Mesopotamian writings. Joshua bringing down the walls of Jericho is also questionable, since archaeologists have dated Jericho's destruction to centuries, before Joshua's time. But, many other biblical stories appear to be fictional by people who only wrote them to make a moral statement. But many of the Bible stories really sanction the proper moral and ethical behavior that we should abide by. And if we followed those guidelines, the world would be a much better place than it is today. So the Bible is not really what some people might consider worthless. So, and to really understand what was going on, I had to cut through the surface and closely examine each and every little individual detail of all these stories. And I did this for 23 years before I, arrived at the scenario. And the last 2 years, I went through reanalyzing and reevaluating all of this, because it was just, too incredible. I find it hard to believe. But, in the end, the only scenario that really seemed to make any sense was what that information originally suggested. And the book covers everything in great detail, including chapter and verse, and it's, spelled out in a format that is easy to read and understand. But I state many times throughout the book that the evidence I'm presenting does not necessarily mean that it's proof. I leave that up to the reader to judge the evidence for himself or herself and draw their own conclusions. Now, remember what I said about Adam's failure setting the project behind schedule by about 2,000 years. It appears that these aliens may have given us a last-minute push to meet the deadline of getting into space on time. Without the surge of technological development that occurred in the 19th and early 20th centuries, we would not yet have met the deadline of beginning our space activities by the middle of the 20th centuries. But speeding up the process created another problem because man's wisdom could not keep pace with this technological development. And at the same time, there was the survivors of Adam's descendants whose numbers were also increasing. But it was still important that we begin our space activities on time, so there seemed to be no choice but to let us progress uninhibited until we achieved that goal. Now, it appears they didn't make any attempt to restore the balance between wisdom and technology until after we had made several trips to the moon. Since then, further missions to the moon and beyond was suddenly stifled, except for sending, unmanned probes to Mars and to the outer planets. All manned missions are now limited to projects in Earth orbit. But I suspect these aliens are now trying to balance things out through the hybrids they are creating with these abductees. And considering all of the political, social, and religious conflicts that plague the world today, it's probably going to take a very long time. Now, we know that aliens are currently involved in creating hybrids with these abductees. Many of these hybrids are removed in a fetal state from the female host somewhere around the third trimester, where gestation is apparently completed by artificial means. But there's a lot of evidence that many female abductees have actually given birth to these hybrids. And it appears this was happening in biblical times, and I have devoted a full chapter in my book providing the evidence of it. And if they were doing it in biblical times, it's only logical that they're still doing it today to advance our technological evolution. Now, there's been many men in history that possessed genius qualities that were way ahead of their time, like Heron, Archimedes, Da Vinci, Copernicus, Galileo, just to name a few. I wonder, could they have been hybrids that contributed to influencing and inspiring the technologies that we have today? And if aliens really have been speeding up our evolution, well, it's only logical that they would periodically create hybrids with genius qualities that are necessary to give us a boost, over that next hurdle. So I seriously wonder, if it's a coincidence that all of a sudden electric power and light, communications, transportation, aerospace technology, all the technologies we depend on today, they were all introduced by men of the same era. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, the Wright brothers, Nikola Tesla, and one of the greatest scientific minds of all time, Albert Einstein. They were all alive in 1900, right at the dawn of the 20th century. Now, is it possible that any or all of them were genetically engineered hybrids that were created to kind of tweak our progress and get us into space at the precise time it was needed? And there were other people involved with these same inventions at the same time that would have replaced Edison, Ford, Bell, and the Wright brothers if any of them had failed. Is this all a coincidence? Had the development of these technologies not taken place when they did, we probably wouldn't yet have put a man in space, let alone on the moon.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Can we take a quick caller? I got one that's been on hold for a little bit.
Okay.
All right, hold on. Caller, good evening. You're on with Alan Roberts.
Wow, it's good to hear you. Sitchin and homeboy that breaking the gospel. You're on it, man. I think,
He's got it nailed, Harv.
Yes, sir. I'm in it. I'm confused mostly, but mostly I love what he's saying. The guy's right on the money. You know what's going on. It came here from nothing. It's like that. Monkey to a man. Oh, man, I looked at the evidence. It didn't happen. It was a DNA manipulation. Everybody knows that. Right? Or is it just me?
Well, I think there's a lot that feel it. What do you? I mean, when you present your case, Alan, to a lot of, well, not your case, but your book. I know you give a lot of talks. What are you get mixed feelings sometimes, or you get people thinking?
Well, I think more than anywhere, I've got people thinking. I mean, I've had very little flack. In fact, I haven't received any flack. I've had a few people say, well, I don't totally agree with what you're saying, but gee whiz, it's given me something to think about. I mean, let me think about it.
Well, yeah, it happened somehow. And it sure as hell ain't in the rocks.
Yeah.
Nobody can see it in that. I mean, there is some kind of thing that's going on. But it ain't in rock, so I'm thinking it's in the DNA. And it was manipulated by people off planet. What do you want to call them? Even the Bible called them something. For God's sake.
Well, it's in and that's kind of what your book is about, Alan, is you dissected the Bible.
Pretty much, yeah. And I'm just, presenting what seems to be a logical evaluation. I'm presenting it from a logical perspective. I'm putting aside all of the supernatural, mystical, miraculous innuendos that were created by organized religion.
Fall down on your knees and beg God for forgiveness. It's like, what? Yeah, I'm sorry.
All right, I'm going to let him go, Harv. I got a ton of questions.
Wait a minute.
Hurry up. Hurry up.
I got to ask you one more question.
Go ahead.
What do you think about the thing out there?
What thing?
Narubu, or however you pronounce the planet that's...
The thing out there.
I'm not sure
I did some peyote with Indian medicine, man. I saw something out there. What do you think about the thing out there?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, life after death.
Oh, okay.
Oh, life after death. Anything is possible. I haven't criticized anyone else's theories, no matter how wacky they may seem, because when you come right down to it, anything is possible.
I agree. Hey, take care, my friend. I'm going to let him keep going.
All right, little brother. Take care now.
All right. Hey, have a happy Thanksgiving, too, okay?
Back at you.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Harv is a long-time caller, and if he agrees with you, he calls it and tells you. If he doesn't, he does, too. So it's about being open-minded.
That's exactly true, yep. Well, that pretty much covers, what the book basically is about. I mean, there's there's thousands of little details that I go into in the book that, I haven't covered here, but I just wanted to give, the listeners an overall view of what it's about. I didn't cover, say much about the first part, but the first part deals, I've cited some legitimate cases, and I've quoted some of the witnesses, very credible witnesses, like I said, police officers, Air Force, airline pilots, and astronauts even. So, the evidence is there if the debunkers really want to take a look at it, but, they claim, well, don't bother me with the facts, I know all the answers,
Right. A couple questions I've got for you, and were sent in, and we've got another hour to go, but these children, one of the questions that was sent in, Bill from upstate New York writes and says, Alan, are you aware of James Fox's upcoming documentary on the Zimbabwe children, and what are your thoughts on him doing this film? I'm
glad somebody's doing it. John Mack was, before he was killed there, he got hit by a hit-and-run vehicle. He was planning on doing a documentary on it, but I don't think he ever completed it, or whether he even got it started. But I'm glad somebody is, because I think that's a very, very important case. And like I said, these children are highly credible. I mean, I've got two clips from the old Sightings program where they were interviewed by Dr. John Mack and Cynthia Hind. And it just blew my mind. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And that more or less substantiates a lot of these claims that abductees are making of being shown scenes of apocalyptic destruction and all of these things, and the biblical scenario in the Book of Revelation. It's all pretty much, leading to the same ideas. So, I'm glad somebody's going to do a documentary on it. It's something that really needs to be done. I think it'll open the eyes of a lot of people that are curious about this subject and don't know much about it.
A question I have for you, because I don't. I mean, I there's so many different things that have happened through history, but were these children abducted? Did this appear on a playground to them?
No, they weren't abducted. They just witnessed the landing, and this is what I'm saying. It was not an abduction. This was not reported like abductees. They were outside their school. I think it was the Ariel School out there in Rua. And their headmaster, he was very strict on discipline. He would not tolerate anybody lying. And from what they said in some of the documentaries, he would cane the children if they lied. When he said cane, I think he'd probably give them a big spanking. I don't think he would really mistreat them. But he told John Mack, these children would never lie to me. Obviously, they saw something that was out of natural origin, maybe in this world. So he kind of backs up the children on their honesty. So, and coming from him, that was a big plus too, because, like I said, he didn't tolerate any disobedience or dishonesty or any lies. And like Cynthia Hines said, why would 62 children lie? It just doesn't make any sense.
The information that they received, has anybody transcribed that, or I mean, has anybody detailed that out? If they've all has that been put together in some sort of a document of sorts?
No, not to my knowledge. Like I said, the only two clips that I have on it are from the old sightings program, and there was, I forgot the name of that documentary. It was just a very short segment on another documentary on the subject of UFOs, and they didn't say very much about it. I learned more from the sightings reports. There were two very short segments on it on the sightings program, there wasn't any documentation other than what maybe Dr. John Mack collected or Cynthia Hind. But, the way the children were describing it, that these thoughts, John Mack, I said to one little fellow, he says, how did you hear this information? Did they tell you? He says, no, it just popped up in my head, and the kids, they said, how did they communicated this information to you? And most of the kids associated with the creature's eyes, these big oval-shaped eyes that these grays have, and that's what abductees have been saying too. They can't, once they look into their eyes, they're unable to look away, and they hear all these thoughts in their heads.
Alan, we've got to take an NBC News break. We're talking to Alan Roberts, his book From Atom to Omega, An Anatomy of UFO Phenomena. Check out his website at www.FromAtomToOmega.com.